The crowd barely noticed the old man when he walked into the auction barn that morning. His boots were worn, his jeans faded, and his hat had clearly seen better days. He moved with a quiet humility, the kind that comes from decades of early mornings and hard work on the farm. People whispered as he passed, some recognized him, others just stared. He didn't look like he belonged here, not at this kind of high-end horse auction where wealthy buyers showed up in suits and designer shoes. He had come with hope in his eyes. Not for himself, but for a chance, just one good horse, to bring back something valuable to his small, struggling farm. He had raised animals all his life, worked the land until his hands were cracked and calloused. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He just wanted a fair shot. But the moment he started asking about the horses, people looked at him like he was wasting their time. A few even chuckled under their breath. One of the event staff pulled him aside, speaking in a tone that was polite on the surface but cold underneath. "We're asking serious buyers only, sir," they said. He tried to explain. He wasn't here to waste time. He had money, maybe not as much as the others, but enough to make a bid. Still, it didn't matter. They asked him to leave, quietly, with just enough force behind the words to make sure he got the message. Embarrassed and defeated, he stepped out of the barn and stood near the fence, watching from a distance as the auction continued. The voices inside were loud, excited. People calling out numbers he couldn't match. The horses paraded around like royalty, their handlers proud and polished. And him? Just a simple farmer, forgotten and dismissed. Then it happened. A sleek black Rolls-Royce rolled up the gravel drive. Heads turned instantly. The engine purred like it didn't belong in the dusty parking lot. People started whispering, eyes widening in curiosity. The door opened slowly, and out stepped a young man in a tailored suit. Not flashy but sharp. Clean-cut. Confident. He didn't say a word at first. Just looked around, scanning the crowd until his eyes found the old man standing by the fence. Without hesitation, he walked over and gave the old man a hug, tight, strong, full of respect. Then he turned, adjusted his cufflinks, and strolled into the auction house like he owned the place. The murmurs grew louder. Who is he? Is that his dad? What's going on? A few minutes later, the room fell silent as the bidding for the most prized horse of the day began. The numbers started high. They climbed quickly. Then, out of nowhere, a new voice rang out. A bid that stunned the entire crowd. No one saw it coming. And just like that, the tables turned. But what nobody knew yet was why he really came. The auctioneer nearly choked on his words when the bid came in. The room froze. It wasn't just the number. It was who said it. The young man at the suit, fresh out of a Rolls-Royce, with a voice calm and clear, had just placed the highest offer of the day. People turned in their seats. Whispers turned to full-on murmurs. Some looked toward the old farmer outside, others glanced back at the young bidder, trying to piece it all together. No one knew who he was. He wasn't a regular at these events. He didn't carry himself like a typical rancher or a rich collector. He wasn't trying to show off. There was no flashy attitude, no bragging, just quiet confidence and a focus that unsettled the usual crowd of buyers. The way he moved, the way he looked at the horse being auctioned, it was clear. He wasn't here just to spend money. He was here for something more. Outside, the old farmer stood still, his weathered hands gripping the fence. He hadn't said a word, but there was something in his eyes now, a shift, a mix of pride and something else. Worry, maybe, regret. Like he knew this moment meant more than anyone else could understand. A few people approached the young man after his bid. Friendly faces, fake smiles. They wanted to know who he was, who his family was, how he came by the kind of money that could stop an entire room cold. But he didn't answer any questions. He nodded politely, gave nothing away. His eyes stayed fixed on the auctioneer, waiting. Behind the scenes, some of the auction staff were scrambling. One of them had recognized the old farmer. Years ago, he used to be a regular here, back when his farm was doing well, before things went south. There were stories floating around about a storm that destroyed half his land, about debts that piled up, about a family that drifted apart. Some said he'd once had a promising operation, even raised championship horses himself. But that was a long time ago. Life had a way of breaking people, and it looked like it had broken him. So then who was this son? Where had he been all this time, and why now? The auctioneer cleared his throat and announced the winning bid. The young man didn't even flinch. He simply nodded, turned, and made his way outside. The crowd parted for him, unsure whether to be impressed or uncomfortable. He walked straight to his father, who hadn't moved an inch. They didn't speak eye to eye. Just a long silence. Then the old man finally asked, almost in a whisper, "Why this horse?" The young man looked at him. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, something sharp and distant. "Because they took something from you," he said. "And I'm here to take it back." The old man's face changed just slightly. But before he could respond, a black SUV pulled up across the lot. Tinted windows, no plates, and 3 men stepped out. The moment the black SUV doors opened, the energy in the lot shifted. Conversations faded. Even the horses nearby seemed to sense it. The 3 men who stepped out weren't here to blend in. No cowboy boots, no auction tags, no hint of interest in horses. They wore dark clothes, clean but plain, and their eyes scanned the crowd like they were looking for someone specific. One of them adjusted his earpiece, while another tapped a phone screen and nodded slightly. The young man's gaze narrowed. He didn't speak, but his entire posture changed, shoulders back, feet grounded. The old farmer noticed it right away. It wasn't fear. It was preparation. Like he had expected this moment. "Maybe not today, maybe not here, but eventually." "They followed you?" the old man asked, voice low. The young man didn't answer. He just glanced at the auction barn, then at the men now walking toward them. Slow, measured steps, like that all the time in the world. A few other buyers started to drift away from the parking area, sensing that something wasn't right. The auctioneer's voice carried faintly from inside, but no one was really paying attention anymore. All eyes were drawn to this quiet standoff in the gravel lot. One of the men finally stopped a few feet from the pair. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his voice. "You're not supposed to be here," he said to the young man. "You were told to stay out of this." The young man tilted his head slightly. "Yeah," he replied, "but that was before they tried to take the land, too." The older farmer's eyes widened, but he said nothing. There it was, the real reason behind the sudden appearance, the expensive car, the impossible bid. This wasn't just about a horse. It wasn't even just about pride. Something deeper was at stake, something personal. The man in black didn't flinch. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "This place, this horse, this full lack, it doesn't change anything." The young man took a step forward. "It changes everything." Tension tightened like a rope pulled from both ends. Neither side moved. The air was thick with the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. Just then, a voice called from the barn. "Sir, we need you to sign the final paperwork before the horse is released." The young man turned his head only for a second. And in that second, one of the men in black reached inside his jacket, not fast, but deliberate enough to send a jolt through the old farmer's chest. But before anything else could happen, a fourth figure appeared near the edge of the lot. A woman, unfamiliar to most, but the old farmer's face went pale the moment he saw her. She didn't say a word. She just raised a hand, and suddenly everything stopped. For a moment, no one moved. The woman's hand stayed in the air, calm but firm, like she was signaling something, someone. Her presence hit harder than the men in black, and whatever silent threat they carried seemed to pause the second she stepped into view. Her clothes were simple, but her posture spoke volumes. This wasn't her first time in a situation like this, and judging by the look on the old farmer's face, she wasn't a stranger either. The young man looked back and forth between the woman and the suited men. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak, but you could feel the weight in his chest. He was calculating, holding back, trying not to act on impulse. He had come here with a plan, but this wasn't part of it. The man who had reached into his jacket slowly lowered his hand, not because he changed his mind, but because something about the woman made him rethink the timing. She walked slowly toward the group, eyes locked on the young man, then shifted briefly to the old farmer before resting on the lid man from the SUV. "You weren't supposed to show your face," the man said to her, his voice lower now. She didn't blink, and you weren't supposed to threaten him in public. The wind picked up slightly, kicking up some dust from the gravel. In the distance, someone started loading another horse into a trailer, but the usual noise and motion of the auction now felt like background static. Everyone nearby had tuned into this moment. A few staff from the barn stood frozen near the entryway, unsure whether to intervene or just stay out of it. The woman turned toward the old farmer, and for the first time she spoke directly to him. "You should never sign that deal. They were never the livestock. They wanted the land, your land, and now, it's not just about the farm anymore." The old man's throat tightened. "I didn't have a choice. I was drowning." She nodded slowly, almost sadly, and now they want to bury you with it." The young man stepped forward, but the woman held up her hand again. "Not yet," she whispered. Behind them, another vehicle pulled into the lot. Not fancy, not loud, an older pickup, dust-covered and dented. But the moment it stopped, the young man's eyes narrowed, and his entire expression shifted. From controlled to tense, the door opened. Heavy boots hit the ground, and out stepped a figure that hadn't been seen in these parts in years. The woman's gaze didn't move. The suited men exchanged glances. Even the old farmer seemed unsure now, his face caught between shock and disbelief. No one said the name, but the tension in the air cracked like thunder. And then the figure from the truck spoke, low and steady. "Looks like we got unfinished business." And just like that, the real storm began to roll in. The figure from the truck stepped closer, his steps slow and deliberate, each one cutting through the tension like a blade. The young man didn't move, but the weight in his chest grew heavier. This wasn't just about the auction anymore, or even the farm. This was the past walking straight at the present. The old farmer's eyes met the man from the truck, and in them was a storm of memories, some bitter, some broken. "Didn't think I'd see you again," the old man said, voice gravelly. "You left me no choice," the man replied. "You knew what they were planning. You knew what this land meant." The woman stepped aside, letting the two men face each other without interference. The man in black, once full of quiet control, now looked unsure, caught between plans that were quickly unraveling. One of them reached for a phone, but paused when the woman gave a small shake of her head. Whatever power she held, they knew not to challenge it here. The young man finally broke the silence. "No more backroom deals, no more silence. This farm belongs to my father. That horse was never the real prize. They just wanted to force him out. And now they've got nothing left to hide behind." The man from the truck let out a slow breath. "You're right. They underestimated the blood in this land. Thought they could take it with signatures and threats." One of the suited men stepped forward. "This doesn't change anything. We have contracts signed." But the woman finally turned her full attention to him. The contracts were built on lies, and forged surveys, and hidden terms buried under legal tricks. You push too far. Now it all comes out. It turned out she wasn't just someone from the past. She had been investigating the land deal for months, quietly gathering proof, waiting for the right moment to expose the scheme. And when the young man showed up at the auction, it became clear that moment had finally come. The resolution didn't come with shouting or force. It came with the truth. The woman handed over documents that showed how the company had manipulated desperate landowners into signing away property rights. The farm hadn't been lost yet, but was hanging by a thread. Thanks to evidence and the son's bold move to show the world that this family wasn't backing down, the tide shifted. The auction house distanced itself from the scandal immediately. The crowd that once dismissed the old farmer now stood in quiet respect. He wasn't just some worn-out man in dusty boots. He was someone who had held on through every storm life threw his way. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the father and son stood at the edge of the pasture. The horse, the one everyone fought over, now stood calmly behind them, grazing. The land was still his. The fight wasn't easy. It never is, but something stronger than money had won that day. Legacy. Not built in silence, but in standing up when it matters most. And as the wind blew through the tall grass, the old man smiled. Not because it was all perfect now, but because for the first time in a long time, it finally felt like hope had come home.